Christina Corcoran from the Energy Stakeholders of the Future webinar series. I am here with Param Kumar from Kumar Resources, and we have today's guest, Nisha Desai from Ennuity Holdings. So Param and Nisha, thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, Christina. Really pleased to be here.
We really appreciate it. So Nisha, can you give us an idea of what Ennuity Holdings does, and some of the, can you also give us some of the most important trends that you're leveraging for innovation that you're working on with your new company?
Absolutely. So Ennuity Holdings is working to create an easier way for people to buy solar. We are starting with people who don't have the ability to put solar on their roof, and we're essentially giving them access to wholesale or utility scale solar pricing embedded within a kind of residential power contract. But the thing that we're doing that's really different is kind of how we're packaging and how we're thinking about the model for the customer, which looks more like a subscription. And so to answer your question in terms of the trends that we're leveraging, I mean, the major trend is really that solar has gotten very cheap, right? I mean, at the utility scale level, it is the cheapest cost of new generation in many markets. And given the cost down trajectory that the solar has experienced and is likely to continue to experience, it is likely to become the cheapest form of new generation in many more markets as that continues. So, it really kind of creates some interesting potential issues, right? So when you think about what happens as that trend continues, as we get more renewables, and actually, it doesn't even matter if it's solar or just say wind. I mean, what you end up with is a system where you've got a lot of zero cost or very low marginal cost energy, right? So when we think about price formation or the value of a kilowatt hour, certainly in the wholesale markets, again, at the marginal basis, it starts to go to zero. So, that's one of the things that we've been looking at. Another aspect of kind of the inspiration behind our company and how we're trying to innovate for the customer. Previous startup, one of the mentors had given me some really good advice. He said, look, for your business model, right, I encourage you to think about, is your business model robust in a world where solar is so cheap, it's too cheap to meter, right? And so, I've been thinking about that for a number of years, right? And in that situation, how do you encourage the investment in new capacity if solar's too cheap to meter and you're not charging the customer? And I think the answer is actually, well, you can't charge the customer on a per kilowatt hour basis. What you have to do is you have to get the customer to say, okay, I want to subscribe. I want the capacity, right? And so what we're doing is we're effectively creating a model where a customer will subscribe to the capacity, right, that's serving them. For our starting purposes, it's really kind of denominated in terms of the amount of production that you're going to the expected annual production off of a certain unit of solar that's going to be enough to serve the customer's needs. And we put that either as something that they can pay for upfront, as if they were paying for the capacity, or they can subscribe for it over time. And then within that, all of the risk management and the variation, we take that on, and we use, all the emerging technologies, around big data and forecasting and the smart meter data, and, figuring out what's the difference between production and consumption, and, leveraging, demand response or energy efficiency to really kind of help manage that risk for us. But for the customer, It's like you've made your investment in green. Now go off and live your life and focus on the things that are important to you. So that's kind of the model that we're trying to develop in our company. And yeah, it's pretty much enabled by just how cheap solar has gotten and is expected to continue to get.
It's interesting. I mean, Kumar, you were talking about earlier some things that tie into it, like trends from the past. Then.
Yes, in fact, making energy understandable to ordinary residential customers is a significant part of their being able to adopt the newer technologies. Because right now, I don't think anybody understands their electric bill. I mean, have you ever tried to understand your utility bill and figure out if it is right or wrong? Maybe there's a small number of us who are who have been in this business for 20 years probably can do it.
Especially if you have solar added to it.
Yeah.
And I've been in the energy industry for a long time, and to be honest with you, I really pay very, very little attention. My own utility bill, it's just what's the bottom number, maybe, right?
Yeah, and it's maybe it's a little bit more or a little bit less than last month's. Good enough. Let's pay it. Okay, and in terms of being able to understand exactly what that means, is very hard. And even in the solar, when they went with things like net metering, etc., even that was very hard to understand for most people because, again, you're basically just accepting a whole bunch of numbers from the utility or your provider for granted. You're just taking it for granted.
That's exactly right. I mean, you're trusting that the utility or whomever is telling you that this is the amount that you've consumed. I have on occasion, done the back calculations to figure out exactly how much percentage they were charging me for tax and whether that matched, what the regulatory statute was, right? I mean, that's just because, I'm an energy, but, most times I don't really do that. But I have to say, I mean, that's, we're, comfortably middle class and whatnot, right? I mean, the electricity bill is not really a strain on our household budgets. I mean, we know that there are certainly a lot of customers who, that certainty is incredibly important to them. We talked to a customer, because everyone consumes electricity, right? So they're telling us, if it's a $25 difference, it's a family meeting to, figure out how they can save electricity. And, that's because that electricity bill is more like, 7% of their household budget, so it's much more significant. But you're right, in those situations, all they can do is they can control their consumption, right? But they don't really know how that's going to translate into a reduced bill or not.
Right. Yeah, and everybody, everybody wants to go green and everything, but they always think it's so expensive. And the way that you're developing it, a model that can help everyday consumer purchase energy is it's a very interesting.
Yeah, we're the actual. I mean, that hey, look, there's some new capacity that's being built, so you can kind of see that. And we're trying to stay away from like, hey, it's just brown power, and we've glued a renewable energy credit to it, right? Because I think some people maybe get that, but I don't think it really resonates with a lot of customers.
Yeah. Initially, the attempt at selling green power to residential customers, lots of suppliers came with that, and initially, until the solar generation became cost competitive, people were had to pay a premium for green energy, and there's a small number of early adopters who are more than happy to do that. However, that's not exactly a scalable model. Your tree huggers don't exactly constitute 51% of humanity. So, so in order to do that, now that the price of cost of solar power generation has come down, there are mechanisms whereby you can very creatively package it. But then, you start, if you start looking at some of the regulatory regimes regarding things like community solar, they're just making it even more complicated. I mean, net metering we thought was complicated because because you couldn't really understand the credit, and things like some of the formulae that are being calculated, it's a completely different calculation, calculating quote unquote the true value of those generations and giving you credit for it. Now, all of us, at the end of the day, if as a residential consumer, if I have to make decisions about my energy usage based on all these complex calculations, I'm not going to do that. At the end of the day, that's what happens. If you make it too complicated, people simply are not going to respond.
Yeah, you can understand why the situation is that way, because it's really built around kind of those wholesale interactions, right? The generator to the utility to, the trading companies to the regulators. And so, what we're trying to do is we're trying to kind of, we'll say, all right, well, whatever those regimes are, whatever the RECs are worth in the market, or whatever the, demand response value is, or, we're just going to take that risk, because we, as the professional electricity company, right, can understand that. And then to the customer, it ends up being very, very simple. But we have to understand that. And then we have to be able to make sure that we are in a position to be able to manage the risk and take the difference between what things actually are in the wholesale market and then what we're delivering to the customer from a pricing perspective.
Yeah, very simply put, because of the variable rates that a lot of the utilities use for electric power, the customer is bearing the risk today.
Absolutely, yeah.
And the whole point is, and the customer is not exactly well equipped to manage that risk. So the whole idea is let the professionals handle that risk so that you're sparing the customer of any kind of, surprises or any consequences thereof. I mean, that makes absolute sense, and that's exactly the way to proceed in order to gain a much wider acceptance of these new technologies and new methods of generation and storage, and whether it be located on site, behind the meter, in front of the meter, meter, call it what you want, but package it all in a form that a residential customer can understand, manage, and live with happily ever after.
Absolutely. I think that's very important for the residential customer. I mean, certainly on the C&I side, there are some customers that want to take risk. For example, there are a lot of energy customers that they're energy companies, and so they have risk on one side, so they know how to do the risk management. So they'd rather actually float, is my understanding, with talking to some customers. Other customers really, the C&I customers want that budget certainty. I think at the residential side, we see a lot more people who really just want the simplicity and the certainty. Gritty, as an example, has shown that there's certainly a segment of customers who are willing and want to kind of take that index risk. But there's also a lot of people who just don't, right? So
yeah,
that's the beauty of the competitive market, is that we can figure out who our customer is and kind of really design our product and our services to that particular target. I think that's something that perhaps a utility doesn't always have, that flexibility, because they have to serve absolutely everybody, right? They have to have everybody without a huge amount of flexibility in terms of really being able to provide unique kind of pricing and offers, and because of the risk of kind of cost subsidization in the eyes of the regulator.
Thank you, Nisha. That was quite an interesting discussion.
Well, thank you. It's always fun to catch up with you guys on this.
Yeah, well, we try to keep, your job is to make energy understandable to ordinary people. And our job is to make discussion about energy subjects a lot less boring than it normally is. So,
You've been doing a good job, Scott. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you.